Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we're here for another installment of the weekly meta breakdown where we look at the top performing decks on the MTG Arena ladder. This particular video will be for the Explorer Best of 1 format. If you're looking for Best of 3, I did a very detailed dive last week because there was the Explorer event that took place for the Decathlon. So if you're looking for lists there, a lot of good options there to consider. We'll see based on the data if we want to include anything for a dedicated Best of 3 video for this week. But I spent a lot of time last week working on it, and I think that's still very topical for the week that is. This is the Best of 1 for Explorer. If you're looking for Standard, Historic, Alchemy, we have dedicated videos in the playlist that you can access and get going there. Quick thanks to the folks who do tune in. We hit 7,000 subs on the channel, which was a great accomplishment. My next goal is to hit 10,000 before June. So if you haven't done so already, you're catching this video, click the subscribe button. It costs you nothing and it helps support the channel with the YouTube algorithm overlords. So we're going to jump into it today. And as always, we're getting the data from UntapGG, the companion tool that runs alongside your Arena client, tracks win rates, loss rates, deck collections, gives you a whole bunch of deck ideas, in-game overlay features, draft help, bunch of features for free that you can get started with the link in the video description. But I will also paste all these deck lists into the video description on YouTube. So if you want to copy and paste them, feel free, go nuts, go wild, and hopefully see a Mythic Rank with them. So like I said, we are looking January 8th through the 15th, Platinum to Mythic Rank, 38,000 games of Magic played. And the top performing deck is actually pretty even this week. So we have a bunch of high performing decks. So Mono White Humans at 62%. And this is a creature aggro list that's pretty close to the Pioneer list. We're just missing the 1-mana Gideon Flipwalker at this point in the Best of 1 version. So the Explorer Anthology gave us Brave the Elements, a very powerful protection spell kind of combo card. In a way, when you think about it, so normally these effects give a singular creature protection from a color. Well, this particular one gives all your white creatures protection from a color until end of turn for 1 mana. There's a lot of monocolored decks in the format, so being able to 1 mana have all your creatures basically be unblockable in an aggressive deck is a crazy rate. It's interesting that this version is only playing 2 copies. We typically see this as a 4 of in these lists. Number of powerful 1-drops. Dauntless Bodyguard gives you protection. Hopeful Initiate gets bigger with attacks and can be used to destroy artifacts or enchantments. Recruitment Officer can find a number of soldiers that exist within the deck, so some card advantage in your mana, in your 1-drop creature. Luminarch Aspirant, very powerful 2-drop that gets your other things bigger. Similarly with Thalia's Lieutenant. Thalia's Lieutenant puts counters on all your other humans, which is basically everything in the deck except Skyclave Apparition. And then whenever future humans come into play, it gets counters itself. So nice kind of synergy there. Thalia's attacks effect, so soldier, 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 not a soldier. Adelan is just a powerful 3-drop. An army in a can gets bigger and with more creatures that come into play. Also, the tokens it makes are humans, which also pump up Thalia's Lieutenant. So you can get this real chunky lieutenant going. Brutal Cathar and Skyclave Apparitions as your removal spell. So you have 6 3-mana exile style effects. The Cathar can be found, since it's a soldier, off the Recruitment Officer. And then lastly, a singular copy of Extraction Specialist. So this does have the downside where it results in the creature you bring back cannot attack, but there's a number of useful enter the battlefield style effects, whether it be Thalia's Lieutenant, the Dauntless Bodyguard for a protection effect, Luminarch Aspirant, or even just a static Recruitment Officer to draw you cards every turn. This deck also has a bunch of utility lines. So you have Mutavault, which is a new creature line from Explorer Anthologies 2. 1 mana for a 2/2 that's all creature types. So you can activate this, play Thalia's Lieutenant, it gets the counters. Notably though, this is a colorless creature, so Brave the Elements does not give its unblockable in that case. Chefnet Dunes as a pump ability, Castle Ardenvale for tokens, and then Ejanjo as removal. So a lot of utility in the lands. So even if you flood, you have a lot of things to do with your mana. We then go to the combo deck of the format, Abzan Greasefang. So just percentage points behind the Mono White deck. And this deck here got the addition of Satyr Wayfinder. So 2 mana, 1/1, mills 4. You put a land into your hand from those 4, rest into your graveyard. And the core of the deck is as early as turn 3 in this particular build. what you're looking to do is mill over like any of these vehicles, preferably Parhelion, and then you cast Greasefang. Greasefang has enough power on its own to crew any of them, and then you attack in. With Parhelion, particularly, can deal 13 damage on turn 3, and then leaves you 2 4/4 Vigilance Angels, which oftentimes is enough to win the game on its own. You're putting cards into your graveyard through effects like Witherbloom's Command, Grizzly Salvage, the Rafine's Informant, and Liliana can also discard vehicle copies from the hand. And also, don't forget this, Thoughtseize you can target yourself. So if it makes sense, like turn 2 Thoughtseize myself, turn 3 Greasefang, do it. It's a way to get your Greasefang or your vehicle into the yard, so that's another way there. You could also reanimate your Greasefangs with Can't Stay Awake. So then we go to Gruel Aggro at 61%. So another vehicle-focused deck. However, this one's not trying to cheat it out from the graveyard. Instead, it's just trying to ramp into the effects. So you have Elvish Mystic, Llanowar Elves as your early drops. So you can go 2 mana into 3 mana. You have the Explorer or the Adventure creatures in Bone Crusher Giant and Lovestruck Beast. Reckless Stormseeker is a nice card here because if you go turn 1 Llanowar Elves, turn 2 Reckless Stormseeker, turn 3 Chariot. Chariot can crew with the copies of the tokens it makes. The Stormseeker can give it haste, and you attack right away, making a copy of it. This was the deck that provided me the most amount of losses in the decathlon. I was on a number of different decks, and it kept beating me up, which probably should have meant I should have played this deck in best of 3 as well. I have this deck in paper. I don't know why I didn't actually play this one, but wanted to try something else. A Crown War can steal all your opponent's creatures, also makes attacking blocking a little awkward. Notably, if you're using this version, so with the Cronin War, you steal it. Once it goes to Chapter 3, on your turn, you give back the creature. Go to full control if you have a vehicle out, because if you crew that creature, it taps the creature, so it deals damage to itself. So that's one thing that when I was playing against some folks, they missed that line a couple times. So little kind of old standard trick with these cards here. Addition, you have Mutavaults in these, as well as Lair of the Hydra and a Den of the Bugbear, along with the creature lands. Jingantha Companions typically associated with the deck as well. We then go to Mono Green Devotion. So this is the deck in best of 3 that I got my 7 wins with for the decathlon. This is a big mana Nykthos deck. Ideal draws are like turn 1 Llanowar Elf, turn 2 Kiora into potentially another elf. And then you like play Nykthos, generate a whole bunch of mana. Your kind of key cards, Cavalier of Thorns, can help you dig. It generates a lot of mana as well. Finds your Nykthos. Storm the Festival finds you some of your top end threats. And then Karn the Great Creator is your real kind of payoff style effect. This version of the sideboard's not great. You don't need Bankbuster. You don't need the Great Henge. What you should be playing is Tormod's Crypt, potentially a Pithing Needle or Stone Brain as well in here. Most likely, this should be Karn Silex, and this should be Tormod's Crypt. Just remove these two. The reason being, so Karn Silex is your key answer to the Angels deck. Angels matchup is pretty bad. That allows you to kind of hit them there. Against all the creature aggro decks, you're typically just getting Shadow Sphere, unless you're ahead enough on board where Portal Phyrexia gets them, and you can generate enough mana. This usually comes in against the slower control-y style decks. This is the more targeted removal. But the ways I bet Angels was typically Karn Silex when they went wide, or if they didn't commit enough to the board. I just Portal to Phyrexia and I became the Angel player, basically. So make those changes to the sideboards. I don't like Nissa necessarily in this deck. It's kind of win more at times. So I was actually playing, like, there should also be Boat here. Get rid of Cauldron, play Boat. Sky Sovereign. So I wasn't playing any Nissa. I wasn't playing Gargaroth. I can see Gargaroth in best of 1, but if you want, shave the 2 Nissas, play the 4th Lovestruck Beast, it's good in the aggro decks, and play 1 Sky Sovereign main. Sky Sovereign main won me so many games, because they often don't play around it. They usually expect you to play the Karn first to fetch it. So those are kind of my thoughts. Played a lot of the deck in the tournament. We then go to 4-color Fires of Invention. Again, just a lot of decks just hovering around that 60% mark. Just beating up on all the brews. So this is a Fires, it's kind of like a Boros Fires of Invention that's splashing white-green. And you're doing that in part for the domain effect in Leyline Binding. You have a Karuga companion here to draw you cards. But the deck's centered around Fires of Invention, the non-nerf version, just showing up here, but it's the 4-mana version of the card. So it lets you cast multiple spells per turn. Karuga means you can't have spells that cost less than 3 mana. You get around that through the abilities of like Bonecrusher's Stomp or Colossal Sky Turtle's Channel ability, as well as the Leyline Binding costing as little as 1 mana. The core of the deck with Fable the Mirror Breaker, you get to make copies of like Cavalier Flames, kind of combo kill your opponent that way. Otherwise, Kenrith's abilities, all super useful. Omnath gets you cards and gains you life mixed in with some Skyclaves and Bonecrushers. The temporary lockdown is your answer to the aggressive decks. Then go to Boros Heroic. This was a deck that was a little higher win rate earlier. This was one of the top decks a couple weeks ago, but the core of this deck is like a heroic kind of Magecraft, if you adjacent, but you get the addition of Favored Hoplite, which gets bigger when you target it and prevents combat damage, or prevents all damage actually, like whether burn or combat. You have stuff like Swiftspear, the 10th District Legionnaire that gets bigger, Illuminator Virtuoso that gets bigger and has double strike, Arcanist Flashback stuff from your graveyard. Then you just have a lot of cheap spells, so things like Ancestral Anger that give you a bonus of some sort, usually power and condition of like First Strike or Trample, whatever it may be, and draws a card. A Defiant Strike gives you a bonus, so just a lot of things that cycle. You have God's Willing of Protection, Homestead Courage gives you Vigilance, and can be 2 spells in 1. You have Reckless Rage that can basically kill your opponent's thing while also triggering a heroic trigger on your side, and then kind of the card that usually wins it for you is Invigorating Rampage. Gives you +4 power and trample across either 1 or 2 bodies. So that's a really nice way with something like Illuminator Virtuoso, where you're going to pump through a lot of damage. Well, now it has trample, so you can get through all those extra points. We then jump to Selesnya Angels. So this is a very popular best of 3 deck as well. So the core of this deck is gain a lot of life, make a lot of angels. And the way you're doing that is through things like Bishop of Wings that gains you life, the Righteous Valkyrie gains you life, Resplendent Angel. When you gain 5 or more life, you get extra copies of angels. So it's a very snowball-y style deck once you get going. You can holds a huge amount of life, 27 or more life gets you a bonus in terms of power as well. The deck also has 8 copies of like what I call the Collected Company effects. So you have the actual Collected Company to put cheat creatures into play, as well as Kyla's Reconstruction that lets you dig, and you have 6 mana, well you can get 3 creatures. Or when I play the deck, you play Collected Company and you get 7 lands. So whatever kind of works for you in terms of luck. Deck did do really well in the last week's decathlon for a number of people. It wasn't working for me. I got 2/2 twice, but just kind of odd draws with these cards. There's a level of RNG where people complain Alchemy's Hearthstone and RNG. Well, these cards do have sometimes you're gonna get righteous, and other times you're just gonna get nothing, or like a Youthful Valkyrie and a Giada kind of mixed into there. We then go to the tempo deck of the format, Mono Blue Spirits, 56.5%. So this is another tribal deck, mono-colored, and what you're trying to do is play a bunch of cheap evasive creatures, generally at instant speed if possible, and then strap on a Combat Research or Curious Obsession to draw you cards. You have protection with like Rattle Chains, bunch of counters, some bounce mixed into there, and then you could tap down your opponent's creatures either offensively or defensively with the Shacklegeist. Supreme Phantom is your Lord effect, and Ascendant Spirit as well as the Spectral Sailor are both mana sinks. They can provide you card advantage or buffs or stuff like that. You have some Faceless Havens in the mana base here to just be as a creature land and kind of push through those additional points of damage. Then go to Mono Red Aggro, Mono Red Cleave. So this is kind of the Turbo Cleave version of the deck. So higher density of 1-drops in this particular build. You have Burning Tree Emissaries, Kari Zevs that make 2 bodies, as well as Robber the Rich. So you can turn 3 Cleave in this deck fairly consistently between the Kari Zev or Burning Tree drops kind of mixed into there. Notably, this version is not on the Ferocidons, so it can lose to Angels, but it does provide you a little bit better chance against it. Against things like Greasefang, it's usually a race of whether or not you can get Cleave off before they combo you. But the addition of Annex with Cleave scales damage, and then you can get additional boosts with the Torbran. I think in best of one, this version's better than the kind of dedicated burn versions, because it's hard to, a lot of times the burn you're having to use to control your opponent's creatures, so then you just kind of waste gas. With this version here, you have recurable damage sources, especially against like the Angels deck. You could beat the Angels deck through a Cleave kind of draw. With the burn version, you often have to use 2 spells because it's 4 toughness, and then they just gain like 4, 8, 12, whatever amount of life in a single turn. That just kind of invalidates everything you've done up to this point in the game. And then we go to mono green. They're calling it Stompy. It's mono green Elves. So your kind of payoffs in this deck, you're using things like Circle of Dream Druids, as well as Marwyn to generate lots of mana. You pump that mana into Elvish War Master to overrun your team. You can get extra Lord effects through using the Elvish Clan Caller's Call to Arms of pulling other creatures from your library. Dwindle leads 2 bodies. This generates more bodies. Leaf Crown discard advantage. I would like to see probably an additional copy of Realm Walker. This just lets you play cards off the top of your library as well, especially if you're generating all this mana. Another useful way there. Turn Timber is another way to kind of dig with the deck. And then you have some utility lands in the mana base. So that's it for the week. Let me know what you're playing in Explore. Where we don't really see any Rakdos mid-range in the top decks, in best of 1 at least. Usually a little bit better in best of 3. Similarly, I saw a lot of blue-white in the tournament, but generally more of a best of 3 deck that you see it in. It could do work in best of 1. You're always going to have the blue-white aficionados, as well as Rakdos. Whether they win or lose, people are going to play those decks. But again, especially with Rakdos, they have a hard time against Angels, as well as even the mono white deck could kind of get under them. The mono green Devotion deck's a terrible matchup for them. The Gruel Vehicles matchup's usually pretty bad as well for them. So just a couple different ways that those Rakdos decks are getting beat up on. Where the sideboard, things like Extinction Event, Epic Downfall, sometimes even things like Anger of the Gods or Brotherhood's End are all kind of cards that can be brought in to hedge against those particular types of matchups. So we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you have a great one, and stay safe out there.